This meeting is being recorded.
So that's the virtual series cousin's voice letting us know that we're recording. So just be advised. And there was an invitation for anybody who felt inclined to share verbally in the virtual space, like 1 to 2 people. You don't have to, just a request, and you can also share in the chat. We'll hold that for 15 more seconds.
All right, I can't stand the silence. Hi, I'm Susie McBride with Community Connection of Northeast Oregon out here in the Grand. Currently working from home, as probably most everybody is. I thought our group was really fun and interesting. Gregory there has many, many years of experience and expressed a challenge that I realize as well when teaching a financial education class. Sometimes we assume there's more knowledge than there is. So, you know, maybe presenting at a higher level than the group is ready for. And I think we both experienced that sometimes that can be intimidating and you know, kind of create not such a welcome feeling environment, I guess, that people feel behind from the beginning. So kind of discovered in my experience, and I think Gregory agreed with me, that go ahead and start really basic and create that comfort and confidence, and then build on that.
Mm. Yeah, thank you, Susie. Thank you for breaking the silence and the ice in the virtual space. And shout out to giving us that facilitator nugget of remembering to meet people where they're at, and scaffolding and how we do the work. And with that, I want to pass the proverbial mic over to our colleague, Julie, to lead us on our way.
Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you this morning. My name is Julie Wong. I am a program consultant that's been working with NP on financial education, curriculum, and economic literacy. And a few years ago, NP asked me to review providers' curriculum to see how organizations were meeting financial education standards. It was so interesting to see all the different approaches that people had to teaching these concepts. But one of the key challenges that I saw during the review was that quite a few organizations submitted materials with very few supporting materials. So all that was submitted was like a PowerPoint deck without clearly defined objectives or detailed training notes. And having had worked in the field for a while, I know how challenging it can be to find the time to document training notes. And after a while, we just kind of know everything by heart, right? But I've also had the experience of being a new and inexperienced employee with inadequate program materials. And I've spent a great deal of time trying to fill in the gaps of what I assumed was supposed to be covered in class and the best way to do it. And so what might have previously been a high quality program, it could have suffered during that transition as I struggled to recreate something that lived inside of someone else's brain. And so during the curriculum review, I encountered a curriculum called Building Native Communities. It was designed by and for their Native communities, and is, I believe, currently being used by 2 of our Native IDA partners. And it stood out for a myriad of reasons, so we decided to reach out to the people who produced it. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Stephanie Cote, who is the Senior Programs Officer of Financial Education and Asset Building at Oweesta Corporation, which is a national leader in financial education with a focus on offering financial products and development services to Native CDFIs and Native communities. Ms. Cote has been involved in building their robust financial education curriculum, Building Native Communities. She joins us today to share about their work and offer some lessons they've learned through the years they've developed and adapted their curriculum to community needs and feedback. I believe that their insight will offer us a great deal to learn from as financial educators, and will, as we seek to grow stronger and more sustainable financial education curricula for IDA savers in Oregon. I'll be asking Stephanie some questions, and we've reserved some time at the end for her talk for questions from the audience. The chat function will be there for you to type in your questions. If there are specific follow-up questions that that will be relevant to clarify a point, Luke or Randy will bring those questions to her during the session. Otherwise, everything will be answered at the end. And so when you enter your question in the chat box, if you preface it with dive and colon, and that way it'll be easier for us to sort through the questions and figure out from any other general comments you might have as we're going. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Stephanie. Stephanie, can you please start by telling us more about Oweesta?
Bonjour, Stephanie Cote, Indigenous, Grandchevers Bando, Dawa, Minwa, Chipwa, and Dimdagos. So hello, my name is Stephanie, and I'm Anishinaabe from Michigan. And I'm super excited to have been invited here to share a little bit about what Oweesta is and does, and how we came up with our curriculum, and more about our curriculum, probably, yeah. And Oweesta, so we are a Native American community development financial institution intermediary. So if you're not familiar with community development financial institutions, they're your non-traditional, often lending institutions. They can also be depositories. And as an intermediary, we provide lending and or the loan capital to other Native, I will use the acronym CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions. And we also provide financial education and tools and training for Native CDFIs and Native communities to share with their communities. So we're kind of this, we're the intermediary. So between, we're not boots on the ground, but we're training trainers at Oweesta here.
Can you tell us a little bit about who uses Building Native Communities and how the curriculum has evolved over time?
Yeah, definitely. So Oweesta works with, as I said, Native CDFIs, so those small grassroots revolving loan funds within Native communities. But our financial education department works with everyone, or Oweesta will work with organizations looking to start a CDFI, but our financial education department really covers a lot of ground in Indian country. So we work with tribal housing authorities, tribal departments, Native nonprofits, and CDFIs. That's who we typically see within our class. And then I believe we're at like 98% Native American representation within our individual classes. So our trainers are Native representing their communities, or else they're non-Native allies working within Native communities. And then how our curriculum has evolved over time. It started, now it's going on 25 years. It's a 25-year-old curriculum, and it started out as just your general financial education curriculum, bringing Native American specific financial education curriculum to Native communities. Since I believe in the inception, there were a few regional Native specific adaptations created, but as the second and third and fourth, now we're on our fifth iteration, we kept it pan-Native. So using examples from Native communities across the nation and then heavily encouraging trainers to adapt the stories to your own specific community. There are 575 federally recognized tribes that are all unique and have their own culture and traditions. And then on top of that, there are more state recognized tribes. So many different cultures that we're pulling from. So creating a pan-Native curricula was the best way that we saw, and allowing communities to really adapt the curricula to meet the needs of your community. So from that first iteration, it evolved to incorporate more modern takes on what's going on. So that first 25 years ago was not super heavy on, utilizing online checking services. And now we're talking about like fintech and apps, and we have a youth curriculum that's been, how do we utilize TikTok to engage youth and talk about finances? And so throughout the years, it's just taken on more and more. And now we're looking at the 6th iteration of our curricula, looking at scaling back, balancing a checkbook. We're still going to have it, but it's not going to be as heavy within our curriculum, because as we know, we'll ask practitioners in our trainings, how many of you balance a checkbook? And out of 40 people, one will raise their hand and say, I still balance it every Luke typed in, what's a checkbook exactly? And do banks even hand those out anymore? I don't know. No, they do. But so things like that to think about when we're creating the next version of our curriculum.
So it sounds like the curriculum itself is like a core where folks can draw materials from, but then as they're in different regions with different issues, they're encouraged to adapt to those.
Yeah, definitely. So we have folks from Hawaii or Alaska. They have very different issues that they're working around within their own tribal communities. So we have Hawaiian homesteads. They're not going to use the term reservation. And then in Alaska, they might have different methods of within the curriculum, which I'll get to some examples. We try and embed traditional practices that our ancestors used that are similar to what Western economic models use for financial management. So, for example, saving salmon, you could eat it right away, or you could dry it out and save it for later. So how did our communities use that? I grew up in the Midwest, Michigan. We didn't quite have too many buffalo roaming. So if I go back to my community, I probably wouldn't use buffalo references, but trying to tie in our references and our traditional practices to what community you're really working with.
So can you spend a little time showing us some examples of talk about the basic structural elements that make your curriculum easier for inexperienced staff to facilitate?
Yeah. So I know I see Dimas on the line. He's an experienced trainer. I'll share my screen, and I like to think it is easy once people take the training. It's the trainer is pretty fast. We only have 3 days or 24 hours. Now that we're virtual, we split it up. So it's really a lot of information in 3 days, but we like to leave our practitioners with as many resources as possible. And my co-facilitator and I, and many facilitators in the past have encouraged, that we're always available. Please reach out by email if anyone has questions. And we do occasionally get them, but I don't get a ton. So I'm assuming many people are feel pretty equipped. So I will share this in the chat. Everyone should have access to, we make these, we make our resources available publicly. We require to train on our materials that you go through our 3-day training, train the trainer. But on the screen, you'll see our Financial Skills for Families instructor guide. We also have our participant workbook. So both of these are tools that our practitioners have to reference throughout the training. We also have a trainer's portal, which I'll get to, where they have access to a community PowerPoint. It's just very general, but it has everything that we would teach to a community, all the slides that accompany the participant workbook. So in here you see a bit of introduction. Excuse me, I have a little bit of an upper respiratory thing going on. And I'm looking to the side because I have multiple screens. So on the screen, we have 6 sessions that we built out our curriculum with. And if you go through, feel free to click the link. You can check out our participant guide. We lay out our objectives, and then we walk through different exercises, kind of building upon each other throughout our financial journey here within the curriculum. If we hop over to the instructor guide, we can check out each session has best practices and training techniques associated with each of the sessions. So something to help you as a trainer teach each of these modules. We don't go too in depth. Our first day when we do our training, we go over trainers' tips and techniques. And when we're in person or virtual throughout the training, we'll add in little tips or tricks to teach each of the activities. But the facilitator's guide is actually pretty packed with a lot of training alternatives. So different activities, ways you could play the activities differently depending on your community. So just lots of information to accompany that participant guide that you'll be walking your participants through. And then next, so they have the 2 books, the PowerPoint. They'll have access to, excuse me, just one moment. They'll have access to this, what we're calling the trainer's portal, and we're a nonprofit. We don't have a lot of money to throw at a big, robust online platform. So it's just, you click it, log in, and then scroll down, and there's a lot of resources. So here, this is for our youth curriculum. We have a lot of PDFs, different games that aren't in the book, just a lot of different options that someone can click through and access. In addition to the curriculum. We also this year, transitioning with COVID, we created an online training center, and again, we don't have a lot of money and resources. So this is built by me, who is not an IT expert. So each person, this is to create an asynchronous addition to our training. We found that, one, we did not want to do 8 hours of Zoom in one day. So we took the training and broke it down and spread it out over time. So we were originally doing 5 hours a day for 5 days, and that was a lot. It's a lot to ask for someone to take 5 whole days off just to get this instructor training. So now we have it spread out, 2 versions spread out over 2 weeks or spread out over 3 days, but with this accompanying online asynchronous module. So here we've got the financial skills for families. When they're registered, they're able to access it. They'll scroll down. This particular training we did in November. So it's November resources, and they'll have access to this indefinitely. But in here, well, an example, we have the facilitation skills. We've recorded a few videos to help trainers preparing for training, facilitation skills. And then in here, they'll have access to the workbook and any accompanying materials for the training. So those are just a few tools and resources that we have for our trainers once they've gone through our training.
That's awesome. One of the things I really loved about the instructor guide is how much time you all took in putting together really comprehensive guide from soup to nuts on skills just for the instructors. Because again, I did not write down the name of the lady who spoke and talked about how often when you're in class, you assume that people are at a higher level than they actually are. And then sometimes they're reluctant to ask a question or clarify when a concept is talked about because it's assumed that everyone in the room knows. And I think the same can happen when we're facilitating, that we assume that the person who's been brought onto a job knows exactly what to do and what the best practices are. And so, I mean, the first 57 pages of the instructor guide provide a huge amount of information about like best practices in terms of, you know, even down to how to best set up a room and presentation techniques, all kinds of ideas for icebreakers. Is such a great resource. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so we can see that you guys have spent a lot of time documenting all these tools and curricula for your users. Why do you think it's important to have a well-documented curriculum? How does that support better outcomes?
Great question. I think having a well-documented curriculum is important just to ensure that practitioners are able to take the curriculum and reteach it. I'm also in the fitness industry, so I'm familiar with a lot of different curriculum. Like there are a lot of regurgitation curricula, you know, like Zumba. If you walk into one Zumba class, it's all the same because they have to teach the exact same thing. That's what we want to prepare, best equip our financial educators with the curriculum to feel like they can teach it the way that we taught them. And to do this, it's to kind of put everything that we know and that all the resources that we have and give them to the trainers. And then same with our trainers, that they feel comfortable enough as practitioners to share those resources with their clients. Because, you know, the more information and resources that our clients on the ground have, the better they are able to handle financial management. And yeah, so having curriculum and also a facilitator's guide to help people through that process is just, that's where we're seeing great outcomes. So amazing outcomes with our pre and post. We have and I can drop this in the link or in the chat. I forgot to share it. We actually went through kind of a review study of our curriculum a few years ago with some cohorts of practitioners, and they'd record and send us their pre and post surveys, as well as 6 months post and 12 months post. And it's really interesting to see the results. And that's through this study, we came out with our coaching curriculum, because we noticed that the thing where, you'll see pre and post, people start here, post training, they're here, they're doing great, saving. And then 6 months later, they take a little dip down. And the analogy would be similar to working out. You know, you start out strong with those New Year's resolutions, you're losing weight by June or March, and then June hits and you get a little slump. And we see that in the fitness industry. There's not a lot of participation in June and July in the fitness classes, but then you see a resurgence happen like right before that 12-month mark again. And what we noticed with this study is that individual coaching has really propelled that 6-month into an upward trajectory come 12 months. So it was really interesting to see that, how participants are utilizing the curriculum on the ground, and then how practitioners are able to facilitate that learning and those habit changes.
So just to clarify, is it one or the other, or are people taking the class and then being offered coaching after they graduate the class?
Yep. So the latter, kind of having it hand in hand. Having a one-off class, you'll see success, but the success just doesn't stick for as many participants. You have to have that continued engagement is what we found.
Wonderful, thank you. So, sorry, I lost my train of thought. 1 second, please. What advice or suggestions do you have for facilitators to keep their curriculum or training notes or materials up to date? Is that something that you cover in your train to trainers about, like, if you want to make a modification, you know, like notate it somewhere? Or
That's a great question, because as we see sometimes, policies can change around finances, and you want to stay up to date. It's something that we do note, but not super regularly. Like I said, we're not, I guess, the gold standard. Everyone's working toward perfection, so we're not perfect. So I'll admit that we did not. We do ask participants, to stay up to date. We'll have webinars. We have a Native Financial Education Practitioner Summit that we're coming out with to continually keep people engaged. We also offer credit as an asset for, we just started offering that because it's a little bit more robust of a credit curriculum that Credit Builders Alliance created. So having those tools for practitioners, we try to keep as up to date as possible. And then also, as you see, we're in the 5th edition of this curriculum, with each iteration just adapting to what the new practices are and the new policies.
excellent. So what is the feedback loop that you use to make it better and keep it relevant?
We use an annual financial education practitioners survey. So everyone that's certified in our curriculum, they're required now with our 5th edition to take this annual survey. And it asks questions of our curriculum, such as what session was hardest to teach and what session has been easiest. This last one, it was interesting. I just came out with the report, and it's just an internal report, but it was session 4 was the hardest to teach, and session 4 was the easiest to teach. Like, oh, okay, maybe we should look at session 4. But every trainer is different, is what that's telling me. So we have an annual survey that's required. And then we're hoping to do a second round of that cohort model to really see an on the ground, boots on the ground feedback from our training curriculum.
And so you said are you guys working on the 6th edition right now, or are you on the 5th edition?
We're on the 5th edition, and yes, we'll be working on the 6th edition in the next 2 years.
Okay.
And we
so-
try and do it every 5
5
years.
Okay. So with your curriculum, how do you support participants in understanding the systemic level impacts on financial well-being, not just the individual actions related to financial decision-making?
Great question. So if you're popped into the participant workbook, our session, excuse me, our session 1 starts out, the title is Building a Healthy Economy. So we start out at a macro level, to really talk about what our economy looks like. And in teaching this concept, we don't, I guess, go right at the heart of systemic oppression, and in teaching, this, but we will start out embedded in our Native roots, and talking about what our ancestors did. So on the screen, you can see our example of the circle of life. So we talk about how did our ancestors harvest throughout the year. So what were our practices around harvesting and saving food? Like, what were our practices? So our participants will walk through this, fill it out. I've seen like really beautiful drawings, and it's cool to watch at the community level, elders talking with the youth. There's like this really beautiful exchange of knowledge happening on what our ancestors did within that community. Then we talk about what the economy is. So talking about like what businesses that make up the economy, what are consumers, and what are our responsibility as consumers. Right here, this activity really brings it home, because we talk about within our individual community, who are those individuals, those business owners that are members of the community. And we talk about how those dollars with those individuals stay within the community. And then at the community level with tribal communities kind of specifically, we're looking at businesses that are tribally owned in this circle. So if you're visiting like a tribal gas station, tribal grocery store, the funding from that goes to the tribe, and then the tribe in turn funnels it back into social services, other entities that'll help build the community. And then we branch it out, and what are those non-community, which are often like Walmart, TJ Maxx, those places that we go to, the border towns, where those non-community places aren't going to be shopping at your tribal gas station. They're not going to be shopping at your business. So all of that money is going back out of the community. So it gets participants to think about the local, I should be buying, I should go to the local burrito stand. I shouldn't go to the Taco Bell down the road. Like and thinking about it from that level. And then we talk about how do we plug that leaking economy. So it's less about talking about like critical race theory and long-term systemic oppression within Native communities, because a lot of our communities already know that. We live it every day. So talking about it from how do we fix it and what can we control from that level. In session 1, we focus on that aspect. And then also it's awesome to see the creative juices that arise, because we then later talk about, what business ideas, what's missing from your community? And then like people become inspired and, I could sell earrings, and I can do different, different things within the community to help build it up. So that's kind of how I see our curriculum addressing the systemic.
I really love the way session 1 focuses on building a healthy economy. I have never seen that anywhere else before. And so I encourage everyone who is listening in today to, look at the whole thing, but especially that first section, because it kind of sets the tone of the rest of the program and what the focus is. So is there anything else, Stephanie, that you would like to share about your organization or the curriculum or any other work that you are doing right now that you would like our audience to know?
Yeah, let me share a resource. Here is our trainer's toolkit. And I'll drop it in the chat. So here you can see we have the 5th edition here, the Building Native Communities Financial Skills for Families, our 5th edition. This one has the facilitator guide. We really, it's had 20 years to have and a lot of hands on deck to make it the best that it can be. The facilitator guide and the participant workbook. Over here, we just came out with the teen and young adult version of our financial skills for families. And it's a little different. It does go into like college prep and managing lump sum payments and a few other sessions. This does not have a facilitator guide. It wasn't built into the grant that we had. And we're hoping 2nd edition will have that facilitator's guide built right into it. And the idea is to have it, we really wanted to do, instead of 2 separate books, have it like a book within a book. You see, oh, you're on page 7 of the participant guide, and then have notes around either side to really help the practitioner with exactly what to do on each page. And then to the right, you see financial coaching for families. Like I said, with that pilot program, we saw, or with the cohort program, we saw that people really needed that one-on-one work at 6 months to get those habits embedded and for change. So you can check it out. We've got our coaching curriculum. It's that one-on-one financial work with individuals. And that's what's on the horizon. We're working on session 6, and then, the 6th edition. And then we are also in the pipeline. We came out with the youth curriculum in 2019. So we're wanting to see every 5 years. So version 2 should come out in the next three years. And then we're also working on coaching 2.0 training. So an advanced coaching training for people who've gone through our baseline coaching program. And then Demas had messaged me. I don't want to pick on Demas, but if I could circle back and have Demas talk about, as a practitioner teaching the curriculum, how that is, and if there are any sessions that really resonate with your participants.
So thank you, Stephanie. I had the opportunity to be trained by First Nations. They came up and visited our reservation and taught a small group here in Warm Springs to be trainers. And we've utilized them on the reservation to help teach our youth. So there was a question earlier about what age groups we teach. And then remember that the curriculum is focused for reservations, and most reservations are small. So at least in our community action team, we teach from ages 14 on up to, I think the oldest one I had was like 80. So it's quite a big difference, the generations there. But that's part of the cool thing about the book too, because it talks about generations and money culture too. Um, when I first went to the training, I was overwhelmed. Like I shared with some earlier, I was new at this, so I had to walk the walk and learn. Um, and it was expected of me to teach right away. I was always a good teacher, so I really wasn't worried about it. It was understanding it, learning the lingo. I felt lost um, when I first started, but I reached out to the trainer that I had and fellow practitioners and other credit and financial coaches too. So it made it easier. The curriculum itself is very basic. I tend to call it accounting 101, basic knowledge really, and it's broken down real easy. It's almost easy for anyone that could read. And that's the only problem. I always ask my students if they have a problem reading and they're too embarrassed just to let me know. So it's really easy to follow. It's well versed, well read. I think from the get-go, like what you saw, it talks about the circle of life and in our Native community. That's kind of just taking inventory and kind of looking at what savings is and asset building is, what you have, what you got to save, where you need to make adjustments, in order to get to that savings goal. So it makes it real easy, and it again, it's a cultural thing too, so I related with it right away and understanding the circle of life, but just take the cultural part out of it, and it's basic education really. Um, the economy, I think, is really important, at least on the reservations, because we tend to be so poor and live below the poverty level. But those are the clients that we're reaching out to already in the IDA program, if that's what you're doing, or other programs already. So we're teaching people that are living a subsistence economy already, just surviving. So that's a lot of what Native culture was a subsistence economy. We didn't have a market economy. We had an economy where we just survived and had a little bit to a little bit of leeway there and to live. It wasn't for profit. So that's the different thing. I think the challenge in Indian country is moving beyond that survival mode, subsistence economy, into a market economy, or having a profit or saving money for your asset purchase or whatever it is. So, but the cool thing I think, at least in Native country, is um, my students are a lot smarter than I always anticipate. I think I don't go in expecting them to know. I heard this earlier. I'm not making fun of it. Knowing more than what I think. I go in thinking that I need to teach them everything in that curriculum. They don't know what checkings or savings or an economy or small business. They don't know how to fill out a loan or what credit is, or how to read a credit report, or how to avoid predatory lending, or how to do taxes, or what advertising is. So, but my students always amaze me, and I've had a few challenges, students that needed to be taught more one-on-one, and that's where that financial coaching came in, and just giving them the tools and reminding them what they need, what they need to remember in order to help them get to their goal, and not making them decisions for them. So overall, the curriculum talks about the economy, checkings and savings, credit, FICO, being a savvy consumer. I'm not gonna lie, almost every group I've taught always focuses on credit and FICO. We go through all 6 chapters, but chapters 3 and 4 tend to be the ones that we spend the most time on. I get emails, I get messages, I get calls, I get follow-up. I have clients from 2 years ago that I'm still talking about FICO because they're at a 770 or 800, that's all them, but it is just, follow up, like Stephanie said. It's not so easy. I know in the bigger cities like Portland or wherever you're from, or Salem or Eugene, I think on the reservations where we're smaller communities, I know almost all my clients on a first name basis before they even walk through the door. So that makes it more personal too. If you could do that with your clients, that'd be great. I know it's hard. I know we all juggle a lot of people, but making it personal and giving them the individual time they need it, and just conveying that to them It's done great. I think I get a lot of participation, a lot of follow up, get messages all the time, all hours, about different stuff that they've learned in these books, so, but most of it, I'm not gonna, glaze over it. They're bored about checking and saving. So when Stephanie said that they might focus more on other things, I was glad to hear that because, like I was sharing with Luke, I ask everybody in every class if they have a checkings account or check. Nobody in this last class has a check, not even one single check or a checking book. So it's just, we have to adapt, you know what I mean? And so what do I do when we talk about checking and savings? Well, we move along onto the apps and security, and we look at different features on different apps or different banking, and just go over what is needed in the class, So we'll tend to focus more on FICO and credit, though, is all I know from teaching this over and over again. I think I've taught maybe close to 200 adults and maybe 60 youth. So not a whole lot, but because of COVID, I haven't had a chance to do the youth curriculum yet. I got all the materials, but COVID hit right as that new curriculum is coming out. So I enjoyed the latest edition. I think it's the 5th edition on steroids, and I've actually given it to adults too, just to teach, just because it's more in depth. This is a really easy curriculum to teach. It's not hard. It's not overwhelming. Again, there was a question on there if it's in another language. I don't know if it's in other languages. I think it's just in English. Stephanie might be able to answer that. But I think the cool thing about it is it's personal. There's stories in there from different reservations and different people. And, those are people that shared their story, and I think we put one of my clients in there too. So they're in there. Aaliyah Lawson, I think was her name. She got to share a little story in there. There's little stories on the side if you guys get the education material from different youth and adults that have different stories to share about financial education and what they've learned. So if you guys have any questions, I've taught this a lot. With a lot of help from Oweesta and First Nations, they're a really good group. Don't feel afraid to reach out, if you have any questions on the material or just anything, so I hope I didn't ramble. Thank you.
No, Demas, that was awesome. Luke Bonham here. For those that don't know me, I figure I should introduce myself. I work for Neighborhood Partnerships, and Demas is who I can credit for getting us connected to Stephanie. And Demas also has played a role in many of the efforts of, I believe, informing the adaptations. Stephanie talked about feedback from practitioners. So there's just a ton of lessons to be learned from this effort that Stephanie and her team is doing. And so I have a few questions, and then there's, if anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll bring them to Stephanie or Demas. And so I'm going to start with just for Stephanie, if somebody just wants to use something, oh, hold on just a second. I think I have to mute somebody. Okay, sorry about that. If somebody wants to use something from your curriculum but has not been trained, are they allowed to do that? And how should they credit the authors of the curriculum if they're like, this activity or this example is really great? Is that allowed? And if so, how can they credit? So this question is for Stephanie. How can they credit Oweesta or the authors of the curriculum?
Great question. You can just say, no, this activity is brought to you by Oweesta. However, we're very go with the flow people. So if there is something that you'd like to teach, I just would recommend going through the training. But if it's something small that like, oh, I don't even know. Oh, like a basic, like walking someone through a check register, like don't need to credit us. We didn't reinvent the wheel there. But I'd recommend for any of the like robust activities, definitely take the train the trainer, because there are nuances within each of them that you get within the training that isn't necessarily in the facilitator guide or in the curriculum. But if there's like something one off where you're like, oh, that looks cool, I could use it as an icebreaker, then by all means go for it.
Great, thank you. In line with somebody's question earlier, so the curriculum in some ways brings in the whole family, multi-generational. So that do you feedback from participant or from facilitators? Do they see whole families coming that are different ages represented, and how do you, I think, accommodate for that or build that into the plan as you think about providing a lesson that might have different life stages?
Yeah, great question. I think Demas touched on it, that we see it depends on each community, but they might see ranges of 14 to 90 plus. And then just knowing your audience and who you're going to be teaching to. So if you see a mix, everyone loves activities. So if you've attended any of our trainings, they're very activity oriented. Our in-person, we have table toys. So part of day one, and you'll see in the facilitator guide, is learning what type of learner you are. So we're really trying to adapt all of the learning styles: listening, visual, and kinesthetic or tactile. So trying to have interactive activities that gets your body moving, not just standing and lecturing or reading from your PowerPoint or your book. You want to incorporate every part to keep it engaging. It also helps when you're teaching that age spectrum to be able to have something engaging for everyone. With the youth, that's why another reason we came out with the youth specific curriculum, because we saw that that was a demographic that was being missed, and also an opportunity within our Native communities, because a lot of practitioners and interviews that we've had, people are saying, I feel like I'm triaging something that could have been prevented with early education. And so we came out with our youth curriculum, which is way more activities. I think it's more fun. I like teaching it a little bit more. But we came out with that because just to get that ingrained in our youth, best financial practices, and to get them the knowledge that we didn't have growing up. And so we see it'll incorporate families, because it says build financial skills for families. We want to encourage that intergenerational dialogue, especially when we only had the adult curriculum, because we were seeing, our youth weren't being incorporated, we aren't teaching our children how to manage their finances. So in the curriculum, we wanted to say, here's how you have a family conversation around finances. Please engage like your parents, your elderly parents. Are they financially, and teaching our communities and talking about like economies from a higher level, Native compared to the Western, we are a very community oriented. So talking about finances and incorporating our elders and neighbors and community members is kind of a part of our economy, as well as our dialogue. And so that's why it's incorporated in the curriculum.
Excellent, thank you. Another question. Are the Train the Trainer sessions open to practitioners from organizations that aren't culturally specific? Or I might add, even on top of that, that serve, a variety of clientele and our staff from a variety of backgrounds. Are your train the trainers open to those organizations, or do you prioritize having those spots go to people who primarily serve Native communities?
We're open to anyone that wants to learn, except I have rejected just one person, and it was a for-profit entity that was making money off of tribal communities teaching the curriculum. I'm like, oh, I really want to not be discriminatory, but it's kind of not really what we practice. So speaking of a leaking economy, otherwise, yeah, we're open to everyone. Just because we have predominantly had like 98% Native American practitioners, and then that doesn't mean that we aren't open to any ally organizations or anyone just interested in training on the curriculum, or like learning, how do you teach this curriculum and how could I adapt something for my, the more knowledge, the better. And we're happy to share that with anyone.
Great. Is there a cost? Can I just ask that also?
Generally, no. There have been a few times where we offered a training, well, a few, it was one, where we didn't have funding and it was a nominal fee. It was I think $200 for a 3-day training. So we try and keep it less than $50 a day. The upcoming trainings we have are free. They're virtual, so there's like not really a ton of cost on our end. You just won't get a physical book. Normally we will build that into our grant funding, where it would be a free training, you'd get the book in hand. Yeah, so I dropped the link to our training calendar. We just came out with, we have a lot of Native CDFIs with new employees who, like Demas, was dropped in and they're hitting the ground running and need to get certified because they are the sole trainers for their organization. So March 8th through 9th, 10 a.m. Pacific to 3 p.m. Pacific, we're doing a training. That information will come out next week. But that's for our financial skills for families. So this adult financial education curriculum we're talking about right now. So join us. It's in a month. I know it's just down. It's coming up fast, but if you want to learn and get trained on it, it's open to anyone, and join us. It'll be fun.
Thank you for all your generosity, yours and your organizations, in developing these materials, offering them in a really accessible way. I know I've benefited from just being able to download your, materials and look through them in just understanding how you approach these topics. And I think there's just a ton for everybody to learn. And part of, what we wanted to bring you here for, I think I'd say you've accomplished, is help us really understand like the deep and hard work of creating a really high quality, sustainable support system for what you're offering. It's really, if somebody's throwing something together, they just have a PowerPoint, they know, kind of like what Julie was saying, they know how to teach what they know, and they leave the organization, you've done a disservice to the future clients that organization is going to serve, and even potentially to your ability to strengthen your own materials as you adapt and improve. So part of our goal is really to just sort of shine a mirror on, what you all, how seriously you take the different steps and how much work goes into that, and encourage our idea providers and education facilitators to really think through what is it going to take within, if you're teaching your own class, to really create something that's sustainable. So if anybody else has any other questions, we have 15 more minutes. We are going to do a breakout in a session just to discuss a couple prompt questions to finish us out today. But put them in the chat if you have any other questions. And I'll just second the appreciation for how you all put the economy and values, Native values, Native traditions at the beginning of your curriculum. I think it speaks to the question of when you start a class, starting somewhere that everybody can relate to, not only talking about, you know, a financial topic that everybody can relate to, as in like banking or budgeting, but just saying, here's something we are all a part of. It's our economy, our, you know, the places we spend money, the values that we put into that. I think that's just such an excellent example of starting at an accessible place where you draw people in, rather than starting with, this is what I'm going to teach you right away, right? It's saying, here, this is the water we swim in, right? It's our economy. We're here to talk about, you know, both the systems that are working, you know, in your life and the decisions you're making. And neither of those can really separate from each other. And so that's really what we're trying to do with our IDA financial education standards, is think about, what does it look like to bring the systemic and the personal decision making and marry those as often as possible, so that we can draw people into really the understanding of the systems, not just the choices. So I appreciate your example of how you all start with that. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So without taking any more of your time, Stephanie, thank you for showing up virtually, for your generosity and sharing. We will follow up with those materials that you linked for all the participants, so that you all out there in the Zoom can, yeah, Stephanie, thank you for sharing your email, so you can figure out in what ways might you apply what Stephanie has shared, or take some lessons learned, or take their train the trainers to learn kind of how they approach this work. So yeah, thank you for your time, much appreciated. And I'm gonna move us on to breakout groups. So the questions that we have are for you all to discuss for the next about 10 minutes. And they are also, we're gonna follow up with an evaluation somewhat on the training, but a little bit more on like, what do you need to build this strong, sustainable curriculum for your organization? If you're building your own, or to pull together what you might do that's just in your head, or to pull from what other people are doing, like Stephanie. So the questions are, what are one or two action items you can implement right now to build a stronger financial education curriculum? So I'm going to put it in the chat here. And then second is, what does your organization need? Oh, actually, I pasted part of what we're going to ask as follow-up, but these are the same questions basically. What does your organization need? Or what do you need that you would like to implement, but maybe don't have the capacity or resources needed? Sorry, so those came in strange order in the chat. Let me do this again. Okay, so one or two action items you can implement right now, and one or two action items you would like to implement, but don't have the capacity or resources needed. And then in our follow-up, we're going to ask you to expand on that with us. What do you need that NP might be able to provide? What do you need that we could help advocate for? And how, as you look at building a sustainable, high quality financial education program, what does that look like for you within your context? I'll also just reflect on one more thing before we go out. The idea that after a financial education class, 6 months later, there's a dip is really supportive of the model that IDAs practice, right? We are minimum 6 months, people are in the program. Because of that long-term sustained practice and engagement. And so I think that's really supportive of the work that you all do, not only one-off teaching, or I really want to challenge people that send somebody to Money Smart or another online. It's really going to be applicable when you work with that client to, apply what one of those classes are teaching online. I know Money Smart, they talk about balancing a checkbook like 3 times in their course. It's like, so really figuring out how do you bring conversations around what makes this applicable to your client, both pairing the financial education that you're offering and the way that you follow up with clients. So that's my spiel. I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. They will be different than before. So I need a second. I'm going to also